Characters. Who are they? What are they? Who will they become? So much goes into the creation of a character, their backstory, culture, beliefs, image, eye color, description, personalities, and so much more. As readers, we only get a glimpse of what truly goes into each character. So grab a beverage and get comfortable as we explore this episode's character in depth with your host, Madilynn Dale. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Character Driven. We have a fantastic author with us today to introduce an amazing character. And I'm excited to learn more about this character because she gets to interact with a bunch of different creatures. And I think there was mention of dragons. So let me go ahead and bring this author in and let her introduce herself and her character.
Hi. How are you? So my name is Deborah Jarvis. I am an English teacher by trade. I teach high school and college English classes and teach creative writing. So my character is Deirdre Hawes, and she's about 27 years old. You know, she graduated college. She's an art student, and she's never really known much about her past. Her mother had died very young, and she didn't know her father. So the character has basically been living with her grandfather for many years now after college and just kind of doing her art things. And then suddenly one day out of nowhere, her father shows up and wants to talk to her. And it turns out that he's had a strange visitor who has said, you know, you've got a daughter, you know, your other daughter died, but you've got a daughter in this other world from this union that you didn't know had existed. And you probably should go find her because she's the last one of your bloodline. And you need to have somebody who is of your bloodline to try and call the dragons. So yes, there are dragons. There are definitely dragons. That seems to be a theme in a lot of stories. But she, takes the challenge, takes the plunge, and dives into, going into this other world and going to see if she can call the dragons. She's had some background in LARPing and D&D, which, that's kind of a cool thing to have, and a little bit of sword fighting, but hasn't done any horseback riding. So this is all new to her. Hasn't had, court dance classes or needlework or other things that would have been considered to be normal in that time period. So she does have a lot to learn, and certainly information about how to act at court, how to behave going to the court after she's had a little time to figure out, who she is. The other thing is that she has to be accepted by the land before she can, help to get the dragons. Her family is that of a group of shapeshifters. The lead line of that family has 3 forms. The rest of those, the line only has 1. And, if you are a female of the main line, you have the potential opportunity to be able to also become a dragon. The dragons will only answer the call of another dragon. So the idea would be for her to be able to succeed in becoming a dragon and call for their help. And this is going to be going up against an incoming army that has invaded the country. So there's a lot of little pieces in motion as the story begins. And she's got a lot of learning that she has to do and go through a few trials to be able to prove to the land itself that she's worthy of, getting the forms that she needs to use to carry things forth and call the dragons.
Holy cow. So she has a lot on her plate.
She's got a lot going on.
So what was her initial reaction to her dad, showing up out of nowhere and be like, hey, you don't belong in this world?
Well, I don't think he really said you don't belong in this world, but it's more, I need you in my world, at least for a little while, to see if we can get you to get these dragons to come. And her initial reaction was not so much disbelief, but just like, I'm not sure that I really want to undertake this. I just met this person. And okay, yeah, there's this awesome talking wolf that shows up with him, and he's very persuasive in what's needed, and he's been very much open about what the situation is, but she's hesitant. And the first chapter and a half is her trying to work through, her feelings on that, and then finally saying, okay, I will accept this, I will go forth, but I need to be able to come home if things don't go as planned. And he's like, as long as you give it a solid try, then I'll make that agreement. So
Nice.
it does kind of take her a while to kind of get into the idea of, okay, I guess I could do this. I'll at least give it a try.
Wow. So, what was your favorite scene to write with her?
Uh, there's been a couple of really fun scenes. I know in the second book, one of my favorite scenes is one of the trials she has to go through. And it was incredibly complicated, just kind of thinking about the puzzles that she had to overcome. Um, but I think in the first book, if we were going to just talk about the first book, I think my favorite scene is the trial she has to go through in the cave. And that was a very difficult scene to write well,
Mhm.
and to make sure it worked for the character, and it didn't become overkill. It didn't do the wrong take the wrong tone. And I think for the most part, it went very well. I know in the third book that's up and coming, I've got some challenging pieces that I have to put together because she has to go and rescue someone
Mhm.
from a pretty difficult situation, and it's an uncomfortable situation. So there's going to be a lot of trying to make sure that that goes the right way as well.
Wow. So, I'm curious, how did she end up in the human world to begin with? Did she have a family there?
Okay, good. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't mention that specifically. Her father had found a gateway. There throughout the courses of the novels, there are gateways that come into our world, and you find
Mhm.
pieces of that puzzle throughout. One of the mansions has kind of Victorian wallpaper and furnishings, almost from Southern plantation style, William Morris pattern, whatnot. So there's definitely ways in, and her father had found a way through a gate to go to our world, had met Deirdre's mother, who had, like I said, had passed away, and he didn't even know he had a daughter until it was brought up to him by a kind of a mysterious entity that came and spoke to him.
Hmm. So, did she grow up with just her mom, or was there like another male figure that stepped in to help raise her? What was
So
her childhood like?
so
Sorry.
no, no, that's fine. Her childhood, she was raised by her grandfather. Her mother died when she was about 5, and so she was raised by her maternal grandfather. Her grandmother wasn't thrilled with this whole situation, so had left. So it was her grandfather who had raised her and supported her, and got her to go to college and helped pay for her art lessons. So her main background is being an artist, but it was her grandfather that was the one who stepped in.
Oh, that is amazing. So, with her mom dying early and everything, was there any trauma there that influenced her character and decisions, like to go into this other world?
There was a notebook left behind that her mother had done some sketches in, and some of the sketches in there were of her father, and she had, it doesn't say it specifically, although she does bring the sketchbook with her, but there are sketches in there that are of her father and of the wolf Nurse, and just so she has at least a clue when she goes back and looks at the sketchbook behind the scenes. We assume she does that first night, and she is kind of like, okay, this person was in my mother's life. This is somebody who existed. He didn't just come up with this story and come here, so it did kind of push.
That is awesome that there's like this little bit of almost like history written down because your mom put that in a journal. That is so
Mhm.
neat. So, what do you feel like was her biggest challenge once she came into this new world?
So coming into this new world, I think, and it says it pretty well in the book too, she struggles to really grasp magic. I mean, coming from this world, you would imagine going to that world and meeting somebody telling you, oh yeah, no, you can do this. It'd be like, I'm not feeling this. I'm not really sure. So her biggest challenge was that once she came into this world, she started working with a couple of people who were able to point her in the right direction. But it took her time to really figure out, whether or not she could manage it. And once she started to discover it, then it was getting there. But that challenge of belief, I think, is kind of huge in the story, because you could play Dungeons and Dragons and do LARPing and do all sorts of fantasy things and play video games, and it's fantasy and we look at it that way. But then you go into another world and you're like, wait, whoa, really? I don't know about this.
Yeah, it's like, wait, this is real. This is not just like for play. This is like life.
Right. This really happens. This really exists. Oh my God, I can actually shapeshift. Oh, about that. And, throughout the first and the second book, she has to overcome the challenges of, oh, how do we fly? Yeah, that's an issue. How do we learn to do this? Yeah. So
she has to learn how to do all the things in the shifted forms.
Right, because you have some instinct that comes into it, but she goes, the first one, she has three forms. She has the horse, she has the falcon, and she has an otter. And horse, it's 4 feet, it's a little bit more land-based. Okay, we have stability. Bird, that's even though there's instinct, it's not something that your conscious mind would be thinking about. And how do you learn to become a shapeshifter? How do you learn to control flight? How do you be able to trust your instincts enough to get to that point? So there's a lot of that development in the second book with the flying. The first book, we get the horse. That's pretty solid. That's easy enough. But the second book, we get the other two forms. And then eventually, we hope, I'm not going to say, the dragon.
Gosh, figures. Yes. So does she have a favorite form out of those three that she likes to go, that's like her go-to?
I don't think she actually has a go-to. I mean, the horse obviously is the easiest in the first one, and she does kind of rely on that a bit more in a couple of situations. But for the most part, it's whatever is convenient or necessary for the time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so cool. Like, okay, I have to ask, can she do like a partial shift too? Or is
that accidentally happens? Yeah, that accidentally does happen. Because one of the amulets that she gets, there's 2 amulets that she ends up getting. The first one allows her to take other forms, not the dragon though. She still has to get the other part of that, which is back, she has to go all the way back to the mainland in Kirilismus to find that. But the first one does allow her to, and there is one point where she learns to take the form of a wolf and then kind of freezes in it because it's a different way of making the transformation, and kind of gets stuck halfway and they have to figure out. So
that's so crazy. I bet that was a bit traumatic for her too. So.
It was definitely traumatic, and I think the dragon was even surprised. So,
so does she try to go into that wolf form again and actually succeed, or does she?
Yeah, she does. She does succeed, but we haven't seen her take the half form again at this point.
Yay! That's kind of a good thing. I mean, so that she doesn't get stuck. So what inspired you to create Deirdre's character?
I wrote this when I first started writing this. I was a teenager, and I mean, I'm 53 now, so you can kind of think, okay, this was a long expanse of getting there. So, I mean, looking back, I think it was just one of those things. It's like, oh, I want to kind of write a story, and I'll put myself and my friends into it, and I'll do something like that. And then over time, Deirdre and I definitely are not the same character anymore. I'm horribly allergic to horses. She rides. So, I mean, it's, she's her own individual. She's very much her own character. And she just kind of evolved from those original ideas that were jotted down in notebooks, and my friends and I would read, and it'd be fun. Yay. And just over time has evolved into her own character. So I think it was just, what am I going to do with this character? When I finally sat down to really seriously look at it, back in 2020 with a friend of mine, we sat down and we hacked it out, and she and I edit back and forth for each other. And it was just going in and saying, okay, what is this character? How has this character grown up? Because certainly it's been, 30 years or so of development. What are we doing? Where is she going to be? And this is how Deirdre has evolved to who she is now.
Sweet. That is so cool. So with her kind of starting out in the human world and having to enter a new world and everything, what do you feel was her biggest accomplishment in that whole process? Like, where did she have the most growth?
I think for her, for the most growth, it's being able to see herself as, I don't want to say successful, but competent, I think, being able to see herself as a competent individual in this land. She knew who she was in our world. She was a pretty successful artist. She had, good contacts. She was doing what she wanted to do in her life, and it was going really well. But, okay, I'm going to try this. I'll try going there. And just being able to succeed in what she was trying to do and overcome the obstacles that were thrown at her.
Nice. That is so good. So she goes through all of this growth from book 1 to the very end of the series. That's her biggest growth. What do you feel was your least favorite thing about her character?
I don't know. There were times when I wanted to poke her and say, okay, stop wishy-washying. You gotta move forward. And I mean, I've got the 3rd book that I'm just starting to write, so we're not quite at the end yet. And I might have something later that I'm like, what were you doing? But especially with her relationship with the person she ends up in a relationship with, there was hesitancy on her part, and I couldn't move her forward or faster anymore. She just was not. And I'm like, okay, we'll take our time. We'll get there at the pace that you want to go, because characters, they do what they want to do.
Yeah.
A lot of times, and we'll get there when we get there.
So how does she meet her love interest? That's opening a whole new can of worms there.
There is another can of worms, and I don't want to get into who the love interest is, but there is an accident on one of her travels, and she's rescued.
Aww.
So yeah, it's not that romantic. It doesn't go, instant love. There is none of that.
Well, it sounds like they have to build up the relationship.
They do have to, they have to build the relationship. They have to build the trust.
Yeah.
And both of them have got some real hesitancy about this because of who he is. So.
Ooh. So is he royalty then? Because I kind of get this vibe that she is.
Well, she's technically a lady. She's not a princess. She's a lady by virtue of her father. He was. We'll leave it at that. So.
So with her, not with, I guess, that world not knowing she existed, how does she go about getting them to accept her?
A lot of work. I think when there's a ball that she ends up going to, and of course this is, this was set up prior to all the chaos, and this is an annual thing that is run, and all the lords and ladies go, and her father's like, well, you don't have to go, but you might want to go just so you can meet people and kind of get to know the other people that you're going to be working with in the country. So I'm going to kind of gently nudge you in that direction. She's like, okay, I'll go. And it's the curiosity about who she is, but also about the person she is now, going to end up in a relationship with, that kind of makes it difficult for her. A lot of the acceptance is just her being her, and I think it takes time for them to accept who she is.
Yeah, that is awesome. So tell me more about her personality, because she sounds really kind of almost like a light and kind of joyful person, but there's all this stuff going on. Tell me more of who she is really.
I think she definitely does seem to be a joyful character. Obviously she's going through a lot right now.
Yeah.
When she ends up meeting one of the other characters later in the first book, one of my favorite characters, Jack Parnes, you can definitely see the humor side show up a little bit more, because he's this kind of almost trickster character, and he's from our world. He's one of the other ones who's kind of tripped into Kiralismus at one point or other.
Ooh.
He's kind of one of the keys to finding the dragons once they get down, and as they head south to go down below and find them below the southern mountains, below the desert. They have a long travel to go in book 2. So you kind of see that interplay between the two of them really start to blossom. And he's so much fun to play, because he's just one of those characters that nothing serious comes out of his mouth. And once they get to be friends, it becomes a lot more of her humor kind of comes out. Before that, she's a little snarky. I think you can definitely say there's a little snark. She has a little sarcasm that creeps out around the corner sometimes. She's pretty cheerful most of the time, but she definitely is wise enough to see when somebody's saying something that is not always as positive, and there's certainly at least one character she can't stand.
Yes, you got to have those characters in there, the ones you can't stand. So is there a lot of banter between her and her friends, like, as the story progresses?
As the story progresses and they get to know each other a little bit better, you do see that a lot more, yeah.
So in the story, you talk about the conflict and stuff. There's a war coming. Does she know how to fight, or does she have to learn how to fight?
So she has done some fencing in college, and she does LARPing and has done some, but I mean, it's mostly not battle sword fighting. It's more, okay, she understands the principles of sword fighting, but it's not her primary thing.
Nice. So does she have somebody kind of like tutor her on how to fight?
When she first gets to Kirillesmith, at her father's keep, there is a sword master who actually does work with her for a little bit. But the premise, the idea is that she probably won't have to sword fight, but it's a good idea that she has an idea as to what she's doing.
Nice. So in animal form, does she have to do any kind of fighting, or like kind of like staking her territory or anything?
She hasn't had to do any of that yet. There's definitely been some I've got to get out of here really fast moments, but I haven't seen her having to do much in the way of battling.
Sweet. Do you feel like her character kind of drives the story, or that she kind of like the story influences her more than?
I think it's more that she drives the story. I think it's very much like your title of your show. It's very character driven, and I think you have to see the progress that she's going through in order for the story to progress.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So when you sat down to actually put her story down and publish it, what was that process like with you and her? Did she kind of like fight with you about putting the story down?
No, I think when I sat down to publish it, it was mostly written out, and it was more the editing that we had to do for it because I'd written it all out years ago. There were a few points when I revamped things that we struggled, and characters really do have their own life, and if you've done it long enough, the characters will step in and go, no, I'm going to do this. And so there are definitely some points where we struggled getting the ideas across. And I think we're kind of arguing a little bit about book 3 as to how that's going to go. And she's very impatient to get moving. And I'm like, we have to get through the rest of this first.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she doesn't like to wait at all. She's like, nope, let's just get to the end result. So.
Yeah, she'd kind of, she's got reason. At the end of book 2, things kind of go completely awry, as they do. And, she really has an impetus to get going, to get moving. It's like the Monty Python, get on with it. We've got to get on with it. And she really wants to move forward, but we're not seeing that, happening as quickly as she'd like, I think.
With Deirdre being in these 3 books, when you started like putting her down, did you know it was going to be more than one book?
So when I first started writing, it was all one book, and it was huge. I think it was 170 some odd words. It was gigantic. And I, first started looking into the industry standard, and I said, it seems to be topping out at like 120K. I think we got to cut this. So a friend of mine and I were playing around with titles. And so the first one's The Crystal Pawn, but originally the whole thing was called The Ivory Queen. And I said, well, I got to figure out what's going on. He's like, well, what are you going with the third book? And I told him the title I was playing with the third book, and it's another chess theme. And he's like, well, why don't you do something with the pawn, because the pawn becomes the queen? I said, oh, okay. So we went for that.
Ooh. So why the chess theme? Like, what is the reasoning behind that?
Cannot for the love of me think of why. I mean, this title's been kicking around the Ivory Queen's been kicking around for, decades.
Yeah.
And the Crystal Pawn, it just seemed like it would fit because, she is the pawn of the crown, and then she does kind of move into more of a position of authority. And then the third book again is following into that theme, but it's not going to. I love the third book title. It's The Ebon King. Ooh. And it's very misleading because there's a number of characters it could be referring to. And I've already had some people try to guess, which character it's actually going to tie to.
Oh, that makes it more fun, though, when you have people trying to guess and figure out the character.
Right.
Did you kind of have that in mind when you came up with the titles, that would happen?
A little bit, but we've added an additional character that it could possibly refer to, and people have been guessing, and I'm like, I didn't think of that, but that actually works, yeah.
Ooh, nice. So in the end, does she get to have a happy ending, or is it like tragic?
So no, there is a happy, at least mostly happy ending that shows up at the end. It's going to still be difficult, and there's still going to be trials she has to overcome. In the third book, there's definitely, it's a darker story. So things went along fairly smoothly in the first two books, and there's definitely a lot more potential places that she could falter in book three.
Nice. Well, we have reached our time, Deborah. So go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you and your wonderful books.
So you can find me on Amazon, and the books are available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble and most of the places that you would find it. My website is www.deborahjarvis.com, and you can find links to everything on there.
Well, Deborah, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Remember, guys, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. And don't forget, it's always time to go indie now.
A muted sound reached their ears, and Judith pointed abruptly to the round holes in the wall. "Take a look," she said. Deirdre crept over to one of the holes and did as she was instructed. Sitting slightly below her vantage point was an assembly of men and women around a large, ornately set dining table. They were talking in loud voices, making no effort to be quiet. "It is no surprise to you that your father is not well loved by any in this company," she snapped. "However, like it or not, you still have the job to act as emissary while you are here. What you do in your spare time is none of our affairs." "Do you believe for 1 minute, Lord Percy, that Lady Deirdre, a half-spawn bastard of some backwood farm in the mountain reaches, this unlanded lady, that Minotaur lover, could save anyone, much less herself? If my father's wolves had attacked her, which I very much doubt, she would be dead by now. Dark wolves indeed," spat Lord Jasper.